une vidéo consacrée à l'apologétique, notamment à la partie qui touche au miracle et aux preuves de l'existence de Dieu liées au miracle, notamment aux guérisons surnaturelles. Et j'ai ici avec moi quelqu'un qui a vécu un miracle absolument incroyable qui s'appelle Bruce Van Natta et qui va vous présenter évidemment en anglais ce qu'il a vécu, une guérison au nom du Christ où son intestin a triplé de taille, il a repoussé instantanément suite à une prière au nom du Christ. Donc, nous voici avec un témoignage de première main. Et je vais faire cette interview en anglais, évidemment. So, hello, Bruce, and thanks for having accepted to do this interview with me. And I'm glad that I'm able to speak to you. It's an honor to speak to you. And so tell us about a bit about yourself, your story, and what happened to you in 2006.
Thank you. First, Matthew, thank you for inviting me on your show. And I live in Wisconsin. We had an accident. I had an accident in 2006 where a work-related accident. I was working on a Peterbilt logging truck. We have a lot of logging here in our state. And I had been working on the truck. It was a 3-day job. It was the end of the job. At the end of the day, I was working with another mechanic. I owned my own business, but I would go and do on-site diesel repair at these different locations. And this particular location was a logging business. They had one of their own mechanics working with me. His name was Leonard. So Leonard and I had worked on this truck for 3 days. This is a conventional or a long nose type truck is what the terminology we use here. But in other words, it's a type of big diesel truck that has a hood. So with the extended nose in the front. So Leonard, the other mechanic, had jacked up the front axle that holds the two front wheels when you turn your steering wheel, the front axle. He had jacked that axle up on the passenger side. The weight on the two front wheels is not the weight of the truck, but the weight that's on the two front wheels of the front axle of this truck is 5 to 6 tons. So 10 to 12,000 pounds of weight is what the part that was jacked up in the air. I was laying underneath the truck. The other mechanic got in the truck, started it when I asked him to. He had not used any jack stands or safety equipment to hold the front axle up, which is the lowest. The front axle is the lowest thing to the ground. If you were to stand in front of one of these trucks, get on your knees and look from the front to the back, what you'd see is the lowest thing to the ground is the front axle. He had jacked up the front axle. We were doing an engine repair. He had removed the passenger side front wheel. I'm now laying underneath that axle, laying underneath the front of the truck. He got inside to start it. The jack slipped out, and when the jack slipped out, I'm laying on my back basically on a tool called a creeper. It was this particular creeper was his. It was plastic. It was hollow core. It was not professional use. It would have been like very cheap tool. I was laying on it underneath the truck. The axle was directly maybe an inch or two above the soft part of my belly, like above my belly button, basically between the bottom of my ribs and my pelvic. I'm laying on my back into the truck. He gets inside. The jack slipped out, and this 10 to 12,000 pounds of weight on this big steel axle that was going from one side of the truck to the other fell to the ground like a blunt guillotine and crushed my body in half. So as I'm laying under the truck, it was the passenger side wheels on the left-hand side of me that was removed. When the jack slipped, the axle came down and went all the way to the cement, crushed my body in half, and then the plastic hollow core creeper that was on, it crushed that too. So when the truck fell on me, immediately, I can't even tell you how bad it hurt. The pain was off the charts. And I called out and I said, Lord, help me. When I say Lord, I'm referring to Jesus. I said, basically, Jesus, help me. And I looked down, and between the bottom of the axle and the cement on the left side of my body was approximately an inch. So just a little bit of space. And I know that axle is, 6 inches, 4 inches, 5, 6 inches wide or deep front to back. So basically, I was 1 inch thick on the left side of my body, and it was about double, maybe 2 inches thick on the right side, because the axle was coming up at an angle because the driver's side wheel was still on. Passenger side wheel's off, driver's side wheel is still on. It falls when the jack slipped out. Now the bottom of the axle is literally touching the cement over on my left-hand side, coming up at an angle going towards driver's side wheel that's still connected. So when it fell, there was about 1 inch of space between the bottom of the axle on the left side of my body, maybe 2 inches. So my body was approximately 2 inches thick on this side and approximately 1 inch thick on this side, all the way across the width between the bottom of my ribs and my pelvic. So my spine, I was thinner than my spine. My L4, L5 vertebrae, which on my body is directly straight through, like where I don't have a belly button anymore, but where I used to have a belly button, straight through the back is my L4, L5 vertebrae. Both of those were broken. And according to the radiology report, they were spider cracked and D-shaped because when the truck fell through my body and collapsed the creeper and smashed it to the cement, instead of my vertebrae being like this, it said they were D-shaped. So my 2 vertebrae are broken. I was thinner than my spine. Spleen, pancreas, small intestines, duodenum, veins, arteries, everything in here crushed and destroyed. The other mechanic, Leonard, got out of the truck. He couldn't put the jack back underneath the axle to jack it up off my body because the axle is literally on the cement now. So he was looking for another place to position the jack to get it off my body. He put it on a big curved leaf spring, and which over here to my left as I'm laying underneath the truck. So the leaf spring is shaped like an arch. It's curved, and that's the suspension for the front. And when you're jacking up anything, you want to jack it up flat to flat, not on a curve. And so as he was trying to jack it up on the curve of the leaf spring over to my left side, I was begging him not to do it because I was afraid the jack was just going to slip instead of raising the truck up. And I didn't want to, I was already hurt bad enough. I didn't want to hurt any worse. So I was looking at him. I was begging him not to jack it up there. He was telling me it was the only place that he had to jack it up because the jack, again, the jack can't fit underneath the axle because the axle's all the way down on the ground now. So he's trying to find another spot. So he's got up against that leaf spring that's connected to the axle, and he's jacking it up, and I'm watching the jack slip like this up the leaf spring, and then it finally caught on a little edge of metal on a little bracket that was on the leaf spring, and now the truck started going up in the air. So he jacked the truck up off of my body, and this now I can see my whole body top to bottom, because when the jack slipped and the axle fell through my body, the axle is so tall that when it fell through, after it fell on me, all I could see was from my ribs up. I couldn't see the lower half of my body because the axle's so deep. All I could see was that little gap on each side. So now he's jacked the truck off of my body. I was directly underneath the engine. The engine's in the front. Now I had a work uniform with the name of my company on it, Bruce's Mobile Service, regular mechanic or technician uniform. And once he got the truck up off my body, I could now see my top to bottom, and it was the craziest thing because at the very edge of my ribs, my work uniform went straight back towards my spine, went down and followed along my spine and came back up my pelvic. So I had this ridiculous flat spot all the way across the middle, and it's something you'd never see in real life. So the only thing my brain could compare it to was cartoons. And I know that sounds silly, but cartoons that I'd seen as a little kid of a cartoon character getting run over by a vehicle and have a flat spot, or a rock falls on them, they've got the flat spot. That's what my brain, it's the only thing I could compare it to, is cartoonish. The next thought was fear that I was going to die. And then I was just looking at my body and just thinking that there's no way anybody could be alive and have their body flat like that across the middle. Like I said, the pain was off the charts. I can't even tell you how bad it hurt. And once he jacked the truck up off my body actually began to feel extremely weak. And I didn't know it at the time, but the reason why my body was so weak was because we found out later, doctors told us there were 5 places that I had major arteries completely severed. And I'm careful to say 5 places, not 5 arteries, because we were told later, it's actually 3 major arteries severed in 5 places. So major arteries were severed in 5 places, completely chopped through. So I began to feel weak because as soon as the truck was off of my body, my body was now free bleeding, or I was bleeding out internally as soon as the truck didn't have me pinched off anymore. So he now has the truck jacked up off my body. This incredible weakness is taking over because I'm bleeding out internally. and I was afraid the jack was going to slip and it was going to fall on my body again. So I was begging him to drag me out from underneath the truck. I've got this big flat spot, and he could tell I obviously had a broken back. And so most people have been told you don't want to move anybody with a broken back or they could become paralyzed. So he wouldn't touch me. So I was panicking, and the chrome bumper, the bumper of the vehicle I was just underneath the front of the truck. So the bumper was just back here behind my head. So I was, again, my body was going into shock. So my heart is racing, and I've got this incredible pain, and I'm afraid it's going to slip and fall on me again. So in my panic, I reached back, I grabbed the bottom of the bumper, and I was able to drag myself, pull myself, if that makes sense, because I'm laying on my back, pull myself out like this far. So now my head and my front shoulders are now sticking out from underneath the front bumper. And I looked underneath, and if the jack slips now, it's going to fall on my legs. So I put my hands on the bumper because I'm like this far out. I put my palms on the bumper, and I was going to do one more push because I knew if I could just get one more push, now if it fell, it'd miss my legs and it wouldn't fall on my legs. But I couldn't do it. And as I was trying to do that second push, my body began to shake uncontrollably. I can't even describe, but my whole body was just shaking uncontrollably. And I was trying to push, but I didn't have the strength. And it was at that moment, again, I was in shock. The pain was off the charts, but it was at that moment of trying to do that last push to get so that my legs didn't get crushed if it fell again. That's when I realized I couldn't breathe at that point. My lungs had been collapsed from when the truck fell me, and it pushed my diaphragm up in and partially collapsed both my lungs. And so I didn't realize up until that moment that I was gasping for breath and I couldn't breathe. And like if you're really active and you can hear your heart beating in your ear, like if you're jogging or doing something physical and you can hear literally hear your pulse, because I was in shock, my pulse was just pounding, like my heart was just pounding, and I could laying there, I could hear it just racing, but yet I'm gasping for, like trying to take in air, and I couldn't because my lungs are collapsed. And it was at that time, it's in a very remote location where I was working on this logging camp. It's in the middle of like nowhere, out in no close towns, and so they don't have a regular fire department. In rural areas we have around here, what's like volunteer fire department. So if something bad happens, all those people have a pager nowadays, smartphone, that goes off and tells them something bad happened. They have to rush to the local little fire department from wherever they're working, change their clothes or whatever, and then go out to the accident scene. So the volunteer fire department. So anyway, the man had called 911. The guy that I was working with called 911 for me. And there was some people that were fairly close from the volunteer fire department. So they got there like in a really quick time. And I'm struggling to breathe. And they were trying to help me to breathe by manipulating my arms. And I guess that somehow manipulates the diaphragm, try to move the diaphragm. And it wasn't working. I still couldn't breathe. And each breath that I'm struggling for is getting further and further apart. And I can't take the next breath. And it's harder and harder. My pulse, my ear, I could hear it, my pulse, my heartbeat just pounding my ears. And it was at like the best way I can describe it is my last heartbeat. It was like it was just like hearing, I keep saying this because I'm a mechanic, but it's just like when you shut an engine off and you're standing next to a tractor or some kind of piece of equipment where you're right next to the engine, you could hear it. When you shut it off, you can hear the actual engine go like this. It's running, but then it shuts off, bup, 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 bup. And it's just like that. That's the way my heart stopped. Just like you shut off an engine, bup, 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 bup. And the last beat of my heart, my spirit left my body. The Bible says that we have a spirit that lives inside our body, and and so people can have out of body experiences or near death experiences, and that would explain why, based on what the Bible says. So my spirit, when my heart stopped, my spirit left my body and went up into the roof of the garage, like at, I don't know, 14, 15, 16 feet, just inside the roof of the garage. So I went from incredible pain that I can't even describe how bad it was to being in the roof of the garage and having absolute perfect peace. Again, I don't have words to describe how amazing it felt. I was 36 years old the day the accident happened, and I've never in my life before or after ever experienced that kind of peace. I don't even have words for it, but just like this amazing peace that you can't describe. So I'm in the roof of the garage, and I joke and make this statement that I was having a party in the ceiling, because I don't know how else to describe how good it felt to be up there. So I was just up there experiencing this amazing peace. I can look down, I can see the accident scene completely, everything about it, all the volunteer, because they come, it's a volunteer fire department, they come separately. They don't all come in like one vehicle. They all come separately in their own vehicles. And I'm watching from above, my spirit looking down, listening to all the conversations that all the emergency workers are having. And because I had a serious, crush injury, and my, like I said, from the bottom of my ribs to my pelvic was crushed flat, because I had such a bad crush injury. They weren't going to do CPR and push on my ribs. I had a couple broken ribs too, but they weren't, if they got a crush injury, they're not going to do CPR. So when my heart quit beating, there's nothing they could do, because they couldn't do CPR. So they just stood back, and they're all just standing around talking quietly, saying that this person has died. It's too late for them. And I'm listening to everything they're saying. I'm watching all from above. And I'm just in perfect peace, watching from above. This sounds strange, but I was so disconnected from the accident scene that I didn't realize that the person underneath the truck was me. I was so disconnected from it. So I'm just watching it all from above. And behind me is the main door, the blacktop driveway that goes into this place, and the main door going to this big implement garage that I was working in. And that's where the 8 of the 10 emergency people from the volunteer fire department all come through the front door. But the last 2 people that got there, here's one little small detail that proves that I really had out-of-body experience. The last 2 people that got there, a red-haired lady named Shannon Celia, and then this older guy, the only gray-haired guy. So the only gray-haired guy and the only woman came in the back door of the shop, which if the truck was all the way, the semi-truck was all the way back into the shop, there was a back door in the back right corner. They came in through that door, and I was watching, from my spirit up above in the ceiling, and I watched them come in the back door, come up the driver's side of the truck, and come around. So I'm watching it all from above. Everybody else had come in from the front door. So I spent the next year in the hospital. And when I got out of the hospital, I went and spoke at that little volunteer fire department. They held a monthly meeting, and I found out what day of the month they held their meeting at 7:00 at night, blah, blah, blah. And I went in there as a surprise just to tell them, thank you for coming to help me. And there was like 30 people at that meeting, and I was able to go around a group of 30 people at this volunteer fire department a year after the accident when I got out of the hospital. And I pointed out 8 of the 10 people that had come from 30, a group of 30. I pointed out 8 of the 10 that had come to the scene of the accident. This is a year later. And then of the 8, it was easy because it was the only woman and the only gray-haired guy, but I picked them out. And I said to them, you guys came in the back door. Everybody else came in the front door. Why did you come in the back door? Because it had been a year. They had completely even forgot that detail, and they were like looking at each other and thinking about it. And then they remembered what had happened. Driving to the scene of the accident, there's 2 driveways to get in this place, and I didn't even realize there's a secondary gravel driveway. They had missed it because it's off the road. They missed it. They drove past it. They looked up in, and they saw the flashing lights of the other vehicles. And then there's another gravel driveway, so they turned that one, came up to the back side of the shop, and came in the back door. Again, it's a little detail, but I'm laying at this point that they came in. I had been underneath the truck, no heartbeat, no pulse, eyes closed for, depending on which person you believe, anywhere from 6 to 10 minutes. No heartbeat, no pulse underneath the truck when they came in the back door. So I should have not been able to tell anybody what door they came in, especially after my heart stopped and my spirit left my body. I shouldn't have been able to tell anybody what door they came in. But a year later, I said the red-haired lady and the gray-haired guy came in the back door. And I even asked them why in front of everybody. And they could tell everybody why. So anyway, I'm up in the ceiling. I'm watching from above. I'm in perfect peace. I'm looking down. And the guy that I've been working with, I'd known him for a long, long time, since I was young. He's a family friend. He was crying. He was leaned over my body. He was apologizing because he had not used any safety equipment. And so he was saying things like, I should be the one that's dead, not you. I'm such an old fool. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's the kind of stuff he was saying, running his fingers through my hair, crying. All the volunteer fire department people, the emergency workers, EMTs are standing around. They're not doing anything because they can't give me CPR because of the crush injury. My heart is stopped. There's nothing they can do. They've called med flight already. before my heart stopped. They called MedFlight. So it's in a very rural area. There's none of the local hospitals that could do anything for me. That's why they called MedFlight from where I live, the state of Wisconsin, our biggest trauma center. They called the helicopter from there. So I'm watching from above. Meanwhile, the helicopter's coming. I'm just watching it all, and I'm listening to Leonard crying above my body, and I listen to everything he's saying. But on the ceiling, again, I was in perfect peace. I didn't feel sad. Again, I didn't even know that I was the guy underneath the truck. I was just all watching it happen in perfect peace. And on each side of Leonard, if you could picture the front of this truck, the hood is now shut. There's a big bumper, the grill, the headlights and stuff. And I'm right, again, just my, top part of my shoulders and arms, my head sticking out from like the front bumper. Leonard is on his knees above me crying, apologizing, running his fingers through my hair. And on each side of him, shoulder to shoulder, him was an angel. Leonard is about 6'1", 6'2". These angels were approximately 8 feet tall based on Leonard, because Leonard was on his knees. The angels were on their knees, but their heads were, a couple feet taller than Leonard's head. So just based on Leonard, meaning the angels were approximately 8 feet tall. They were wearing white, shining robes. They didn't have wings. They were very muscular, big, broad-shouldered. They had long hair that went way down their back. There was a belt on the robes, and that's about where their hair ended. I didn't get to see their faces because I was looking from in the ceiling from up above, but I could tell they were men, like, let's say 8 feet tall men with big, very muscular, broad shoulders, narrow waist. And the one from the driver's side reached over and he put his hands in the middle of the flat spot. And one from the passenger side did the same thing. So they both reached over and had their hands in the middle of that flat spot where my body was crushed. Again, and so I'm up from above in the ceiling, my spirit watching, and I'm looking, and it was weird because it seemed, I don't know the words to describe, but surreal, whatever. But I'm watching from above, and I said, oh, to myself, those angels are down there to help that guy. And I'm just watching. And then that's when the lady, Shannon Celia, and the gray-haired guy came in, and she got down between the angels, basically. She moved Leonard out of the way. She's asking the people what my name is. What's that person's name? They said Bruce Van Natta, and I'm watching from above, and the lady starts slapping me in the face like this, patting me in the face, in my body, and saying, Bruce Van Natta, come back, come back. I didn't recognize my name, but it sounded familiar is the only way I can describe it, up in the ceiling. So next thing I know, my spirit started creeping down closer, closer, closer. And so at this point, no heartbeat, no pulse, 6 to 10 minutes. And my spirit comes back into my body as this woman slapped me in the face. So my spirit comes back into my body. My heart starts miraculously without any medical intervention. When my spirit came back into my body, my heart started automatically. The first thing that hit me was incredible pain, because I went from feeling so good in the ceiling, like I felt the best I've ever felt in my life. Now I'm back in my body that's crushed in half. And the pain was so bad. I said a swear word. I was, again, it hurt so bad. And I said a swear word, and I was like bent over, and the pain was so bad. And all I could think of was that I didn't want the pain. I wanted that peace. I didn't want the pain. I wanted the peace that I felt. So I made basically the choice, a decision that I don't want this. And when I was saying, I don't want this, I don't want to be alive, my heart stopped, my spirit left my body and went back up on the roof of the garage. So now I'm back in the roof of the garage. I'm looking down. I can see the angels are still there. I can see the lady above me. I can see all the people. But this time, to the right side of me, going out of the roof of the garage, was a tunnel. And sometimes people talk about these near-death experiences and they see a tunnel with a light on the end of it. That is exactly what I saw. A tunnel, like at a 45-degree angle, with a bright light on the end of it, a million miles away. And I knew instinctively that that was a tunnel or portal, whatever word you want to say, to heaven. And heaven was on the end of that tunnel. I just knew that I knew that's what was there. And I knew I wanted that. I got in the tunnel, and I was going really, really fast towards the light. And I was happy. I was excited. I was happy to go to, it felt great. And I was going away in the tunnel towards the light, happy to go meet Jesus. And somewhere behind me, I could hear her calling me, Bruce Van Natta, come back, come back. And she slapped me in the face saying, come back, come back. I got sucked backwards out of the tunnel. Now I'm back in the roof of the garage. I look down. I could see the angels. I could see the lady slap me in the face. Now I know that it's me. My spirit comes back into my body that second time. Again, I go from feeling the best I've ever felt to this horrible, horrible pain. And I'm inside my body. My spirit is back inside. My heart is miraculously started again. And I looked on my left and I looked on my right for the angels that I've now seen twice from above, and I couldn't see them with these eyes. There was nothing. I couldn't see them at all, which really scared me because I had seen them twice and I knew I obviously needed help, and I'm looking and I couldn't see them. There was nothing there. So that scared me. Everybody's kind of running around freaking out. They didn't know what to think, the emergency workers, because I've got no heartbeat and I got no pulse. This lady, she was, like I said, one of the last two people from the volunteer fire department to show up. She's doing what she's doing. They all thought she was crazy. They couldn't understand nobody knew what was happening. Nobody could understand what was going on with my heart starting and stopping. And again, the pain was just so overwhelming. I remember closing my eyes and just wanting it to all stop. And it was in that chaos and pain, fear, that I believe God spoke to me. It was a voice. People could say a voice in your head or whatever, but I heard a voice very clearly, and that I fully believe was God. He wasn't scared like I was. He wasn't freaking out. He was very calm. The voice was very calm. I believe it was God, the Holy Spirit. The Bible says when you become a Christian, the Holy Spirit comes to live inside of you. I believe it was the Holy Spirit living inside of me that talked to me. And he simply said this: if you want to live, you're going to have to fight, and it's going to be a hard fight. That's all the voice said. If you want to live, you're going to have to fight. It's going to be a hard fight. I did not want to fight. I didn't want to deal with the pain. And I was like, screw this. I don't want it. And when I said, screw it, I don't want it, I made up my mind I didn't want it. My heart stopped again. My spirit left my body the third and final time. I went back over the roof of the garage where it felt amazing. The tunnel opened up. I got in the tunnel. I started going away in the tunnel towards the light, happy to leave the pain. So I'm going away, second time in the tunnel, third time out of my body. And the lady started slapping me in the face, calling me back again. My spirit again came backwards out of the tunnel. I looked down again. I could see the angels that I couldn't see the last time when I looked around for them in my body. I could see the angels were still there. My spirit came back into my body. Again, this horrendous pain comes back when my heart starts and I'm back inside. I open my eyes, and this lady, Shannon, her face was like she was bent over me really close, like right here. And as soon as my spirit came back in and my heart started that time, she said to me, Mister, you're on the verge of life and death. What do you have to fight for? Do you have a wife? Do you have kids? And I completely forgot up until that exact moment that I was married and I had 4 little small children. My kids were really little at the time. We had 4 kids in 3 years because we have twins in the middle. And so we had young little kids. I completely forgot about being married and having kids because the pain was just so overwhelming that it never even crossed my mind until the lady said, what do you have to fight for? Do you have a wife? Do you have kids? I believe God was speaking through her. In fact, I could even recognize that same still small whisper that had spoke to me and said, if you want to live, you're going to have to fight. It's going to be a hard fight. It wasn't the same voice. It was this woman's voice, but I knew it was God speaking through her to remind me. I thought of Lori, my wife, and the 4 kids. And I didn't want to stay for me, but I could stay for my wife and kids. So she said, keep your eyes open, stay here. I kept my eyes open. They forgot to call an ambulance. The ambulance came. So the helicopter came. They couldn't get the body, me, out from underneath the truck out to where the helicopter was going to land because they didn't have a way to, just that little bit. There was no ambulance there. So the helicopter went back towards the hospital where it came from, turned around, went back. They called an ambulance. The ambulance picked me up, took me to a local little hospital, like 20 minutes, half an hour away. The helicopter came back to pick me up, then took me to our state's biggest trauma center where I spent, like I said, basically the next year. I'd be in for a couple weeks, get out, I was there for, months at a time. Then I'd get out for a couple weeks, go back in for months at a time, several operations. God did a lot of miracles and stuff throughout that whole time. But the lady that was there, Shannon, what I didn't know that day, and I found out later, was she was a 38-year-old woman but she was a 2 months. She had been believing in Jesus. So people would say a 2-month-old baby Christian. So she'd been believing in Christianity. She was raised in the Catholic Church, but when she didn't believe it growing up as a kid, didn't believe anything about it. When she moved out of the house at 18, she told me, she said, okay, I'm never going to go to church again. She got married, had kids, got her, higher education, got all her degrees. And when she was in her 30s, her and her husband moved into a house. It's her story is her and her husband moved into a house, and they started hearing like thumps and bumps and noises in the house that they knew had to be spiritual in nature. It was scaring them and their kids, but she didn't believe in God. And so her and her husband started doing basically a search to try and figure out what's real and what's not real. It led her back to her Bible that she had been given to as a kid when she was in the Catholic Church or whatever. She started reading it at home. She started praying to Jesus a little bit and ended up asking Jesus to come into their life and make the bad noises go away from their house. And it did happen that way. So for 2 months, she'd been reading the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the New Testament. Someone had told her that she should read there. She'd been reading the Bible and praying for 2 months at home, not going to church or anything. And she hadn't been to church for, at this point, 20 years since she was a kid. And so when she showed up to the scene of the accident, I asked her what made her do that. She said she had just been reading in the Gospels how Jesus had prayed people back to life, and he had said in the Gospels that the people that believed in him would do the same things that he did. So that's what made her do it. So she said she just started slapping me in the face and praying that God would bring my spirit back into my body, and that's what happened 3 times. So doctors ended up doing a bunch of emergency surgery that night. My wife went there. It's like a 2.5 hour drive from our house to the hospital. They told her they didn't expect me to live through the hour. So my wife and some people from the church thank God for every 30 minutes I was alive, and they did all night. They're just every 30 minutes I was alive, they thank God for 30 more minutes of life. And in the morning, my wife went to the doctor, and the doctor said I needed a whole bunch more surgeries. And she said, well, when are you going to go back and do the other surgeries? And he said, well, we didn't expect him to live through the hour, much less the whole night. I don't think his body's strong enough. So they kept praying. People from my wife and some people from our church kept praying. And finally, she just told the doctor, go in and do the surgeries. And we believe God's going to keep him strong for it. So they operated on and off all that week. They kept me in a induced coma for several weeks, but they operated on and off all that week, never sewed me up because I became so swollen up and everything, and they kept it open so I could keep going back in. So I'm going to stand up and just kind of show the scars so people can kind of see what the doctors did, but if you can see it, but 5 times they went through here, and I've got extra holes, J tubes and G tubes and drainage tubes, and I don't have a belly button anymore. I've just got this big hernia, and I've got a big net through all this. But so 5 times they went through this area because the truck fell on me here, clipped a couple ribs, these 2 ribs over here, and fell across basically the soft part of my stomach all the way straight through. And like I said, it broken my spine. Doctors say that adults have 18 to 20 some feet of small intestine. So I always get it confused about metric conversion, but I think 18 to 20 some feet, I think it was like 600 centimeters. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I did the calculation, and it's about 5.5 meters to 6 meters.
So how many centimeters would that be? Like 600?
Yeah, 600, around
Okay,
600
so
feet.
like 600 centimeters, I think, if that's what I was told. So doctors removed almost all of my small intestine, and I was down to like 2.5 feet. So, like 1 meter. I don't know what that would
Yeah,
be.
95 centimeters after the 4th operation.
Okay, so I have like that much, So then one of those pieces because they put 2 pieces together. They removed all of the intestine was completely destroyed because that's where your small intestine is right here, right in the, right where the truck found me. So they removed all that was destroyed, which is the majority of it. They saved 2 pieces, put it together, and then one of those 2 pieces died. And that's what my 4th operation was. They removed that one of those 2 pieces that had died. So now I had less than 100 centimeters. And when it was all said and done, I ended up with less than 100 centimeters. And I know doctors say there's like a minimum that you need to live. So I was literally starving to death in the hospital let's see, the accident happened in November of 2006. And by March of 07, I'd already lost 65 pounds. So even though they're feeding me intravenously, I couldn't eat. I had not eaten anything since November to March, just intravenous feeding. I've lost 65 pounds. The doctors say that I'm going to die. I'm going to starve to death and die in the hospital, which didn't make sense to me because I couldn't figure out why God had sent the lady to pray me back to life 3 times. Why did he send the angels if he's just going to let me die in the hospital, starve to death? They said they could keep me alive for like a year. So now we're already like halfway through that. I had a real bad attitude. I was mad at God, mad at the doctors, couldn't understand, all of it. And that's when God woke up this guy all the way across the United States. Somebody I'd met one time over in New York, which is clear across the United States from us. Woke him up 2 mornings in a row, told him to buy a plane ticket, fly here to Wisconsin, pray for me, he'd do a miracle. The first morning he blew it off. The second morning he was obedient. He bought the ticket, came here. And when you buy a plane ticket, short notice, it's expensive. And he paid almost $1,000 out of his pocket to come here to Wisconsin to pray for me. He prayed for me. When he did, I felt electricity come out of his palm into my forehead. I was still in the hospital. I felt it go into my stomach. And literally what happened was a creative miracle happened where God gave me back about half my intestines. So I have 9 to 11 feet of intestines now. So I went from let's say 2 feet of intestines to now they say I have like 9 to 11 feet of intestines. It's hard to measure because they're all balled up like a big ball of worms. It's not like in a linear big long line where it's easy to measure. So doctors say I have approximately half my intestines. They knew how much I had before. Pathology reports showed how much they removed. Each operation just noted how much I have left. And then all of a sudden, this creative miracle happens in the hospital, and I've got half my intestines back. So it's the only reason why I'm still alive is because God did the creative miracle where I could have intestines so I could eat. My stomach works normal. I eat normal. I don't take any medicines. So just a little bit more to my backstory. I wasn't raised a church guy. I wasn't the kind of guy that ever went to church. My family maybe would go to church on Christmas or Easter because people do, sometimes go to church just Christmas or Easter just to celebrate. And we didn't go every Christmas or every Easter. Like I didn't come from a churchy family at all. I came from a family that, my dad's alcoholic. My mom and dad got divorced. There, a lot of fighting. Definitely not a churchy type family. So I had been somebody involved with drugs and alcohol my whole life. I'd smoked pot for 20 years, drank a lot of whiskey, snorted coke. I did drugs. I sold drugs. I partied. I lived wild and crazy, raced motorcycles. Not a church guy. But God, I can see now God was in my life the whole time, calling me, doing certain things to get me to come to him. I had been sober, completely sober for 1 year on the day of the accident. It had been a year. My wife had been going to church. My kids, we'd been going to church together. But again, I'm convinced God has told me my testimony of what he did. When doctors say that I'm the only person they can find in the whole world that's lived after having major arteries severed in 5 places. And people ask me, why do I think God saved me? And I believe God told me the reason why he saved me was to set an example that nobody's basically too bad or that his mercy isn't big enough for anybody. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of good people that would deserve to be saved. I'm not that person. And if God would do it for me, who I know I'm a sinner, I know the life that I've lived. If God would do it for me, then the Bible is true. It's his mercy, not treating us as our sins deserve, but in his mercy and love. And he loves us even though we don't deserve it. And so that's why I'm going to spend the rest of my life telling this testimony to whoever will listen and trying to give people hope that God is real, that he's alive and well. And since my accident, we've prayed for thousands of people, and I've seen God do things that are hard for me to believe, and I'm the one praying and asking God to do stuff. And I'm usually the biggest skeptic in the room. And if somebody gets out of a wheelchair, I ask them, hey, are you on Facebook? And I want to see their social media because I'm doubting and I want to look up, hey, were you really in a wheelchair 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago? Because I'm a doubter. And so anybody doubts my story doesn't bother me a bit because I get it. I'm a skeptic. God's got a sense of humor that he even did this with me in my life, and because I would be the one that would be doubting. I'd be the one that's a skeptic. So I totally get it if anybody that is a skeptic. So that's the testimony.
Yeah, that's amazing. So thank you so much for sharing these beautiful testimonies with us.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, can I ask a few questions on this?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my first question is, how quickly did you recover after the prayer from Bruce Carlson? Did the medical staff like just test to see? Did you tell them that you felt something grew back in your
I didn't
stomach?
tell them anything. No, I didn't tell the doctors anything. They're feeding me intravenously. And what happened was I was losing weight, like losing ounces every day. Every day I was losing weight, even though I was being fed intravenously. After the guy came and prayed, all of a sudden my weight leveled off and actually started going up a little bit. And they thought there must be a problem and that they were going to have to adjust the TPN, the parental nutrition that they call it, that they put in your arm. And I guess it's a formula and every body's a little bit different. And they thought I must have been retaining water weight, they said. So they were going to adjust the formula and they were doing some tests and they would let me have ice chips is all I could have ice chips. That's it. I couldn't drink water, nothing. But they let me have ice chips. They're feeding me intravenously. And then again, the weight leveled off and actually started gaining a little bit. And so that's when they started doing testing. And when they were doing an upper body GI, that's when the radiologist saw all this extra intestine. And he was actually, they made me drink this barium, made me drink this stuff. And then I lay down on a bed and then they do their scan and they said it's going to take like 45 minutes. And they got to the end and it's just me and the radiologist in the room and he's looking at the stuff and he's looking at my medical records and he kept mumbling about a mistake. And finally I asked him, I said, what, is there a mistake? The doctors made a mistake inside my body or what kind of mistake are you seeing? He said, oh no, don't worry about it. And I got kind of excited. I'm like, well, it's my body. If there's a mistake, you better tell me. And he said, no, the mistake is in the medical records. He says, the doctor, and he's going through each operation in the records saying how much intestine I have. And then the last operation, they removed some even more. He said, but you've got at least half your intestines here. He said, I don't understand. And that's why he was seeing the mistake is because what the records said versus what he saw in my body. So
how many doctors were present during the operations, during the 4 operations? Were there like
multiple
3, 4?
doctors.
Multiple?
Oh, yeah.
So they
Yeah.
could check and verify the record?
Yeah, it's a teaching hospital. It's a University Wisconsin Madison, and it's actually it's a college to teach doctors. So they always have the extra ones in there as part of their teaching. That's what they do. There's always multiple doctors. So like I had the 5th operation after the accident happened because my gallbladder was wrecked because of the parental nutrition. I had some adhesions that needed to be fixed, and I had one rib that would never grow back. So my last operation, they took out the rib and threw it away. They took out my gallbladder, threw it away, and they fixed some of the adhesions. And that same doctor who was an atheist, and I had told him that I'd seen the angels, and he kind of just blew me off and looked at me like I was crazy. But then on that last operation, when he opened me up and he saw with his own eyes a bunch of intestines, half my intestines, I think he knew he had removed. One of the nurses and one of the other doctors that were in the room for that last operation told me that he actually threw the scalpel and began to scream and swear, turned away from my body and just had a meltdown, calmed himself back down, asked for a fresh scalpel, turned back around and went back to work like nothing had happened. But obviously, the reason why he had a meltdown is because he knew in his mind that he had removed all that intestine and it shouldn't be there. And because he's literally, they call him a genius. They say the man is a genius because he's so smart and he knows that intestine doesn't grow back. It doesn't ever grow back. Unless maybe the only cases that can ever be found of small intestine growing back are children if they have an intestinal problem while they're a child, it can still continue to grow and do some stuff. But once you're an adult, it's done. Your intestine never grows back. And he could see he had removed all my intestines except a little piece, and now half my intestines are back. And later, he was interviewed by History Channel, who is doing a story on me and different miracles. And I had told the people at History Channel this guy was an atheist. So off the video, the lady, the interviewer, who was also an atheist, asked him, said, hey, this guy says that you're an atheist. And he's told her, this is like 5 or 6 years later after the accident, he told her that he's no longer an atheist, that he's an agnostic, that he knows that there's a higher power, and that when he saw intestines for me that had come back, that he knew he had removed, was the first time that he absolutely knew that he knew that he knew something else was going on in this, like, supernatural other than the natural. He said, but since that time, you know, because that happened a long, long time ago. Since that time, he's seen other things, other supernatural occurrences in his job where he knew something else was going on that didn't have explanation. So he said he now believes there's a God. He doesn't know. He's not going to put a name on the God. He told her, I know it's Jesus, but because that's who I prayed to. But he went from being an atheist to now saying, oh, there's, you know, there's some higher power out there because there's no explanation for this.
Was this Michael Shore or Andrew Taylor?
Yes. Michael Shore.
Michael Shore, yeah, nice. And so how many people checked after that you gained 300 centimeters, that you had a 300 centimeter intestine?
How many people? What do you mean?
How many, was he the only guy who checked and who verified that it grew back? Or
well, he saw it with his eyes when he opened me up the 5th time. He saw it with his eyes, but there were Andrew Taylor was a radiologist who looked at he's the head senior radiologist, or was, from that hospital back in the day. He's the one that looked at the scans. Plus, there's a local hospital radiologist looked at the scans. Plus, different multiple TV shows all want to see the results. So I give them the radiological scans for them to. You have to have a scanner or viewer. You can't just like look at it on a normal computer. It has to have a reader, and so they look at it with their software designed to look at it. And the problem with scans of what I'm told is the problem with scans of small intestine, they can't verify the exact length. It can just make a guesstimation. But mine had such a dramatic difference of just being a little bit to half. That's such a dramatic that they can make it, you know, say, yeah, he just had a little piece and now he's got. That's why they can't say 9 feet or 11 feet. They say about 9 to 11. So there's a range, but they can tell, you know, they can read it gross, if that makes sense. Not they couldn't tell the difference of like 10 centimeters, but they could tell a difference of a couple feet easily. And so they can see now that I just had a little piece and now I've got half my intestines, but they can't say exactly this centimeter, but it doesn't need to be because it was such a big miracle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really nice. I would love to see the radio, but like if you could send me the paper, the official documents, that would be really
it's CDs. You know, I've got
CDs.
like 7 CDs with the scans on them. And then you have to put them in a computer that has a reader that reads the. You know,
but you have the pictures. Do you have the pictures of the like when they did the radio on you? Do you have the medical pictures?
I've got the scans themselves, and they're all on the CD.
Scans.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And they're not on the internet.
No, because they're all on CDs.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's all, and it's because it's the way CAT scans. They're like 3D, and they you actually have to have a reader. You can't. It's not like a snapshot picture doesn't do it like an X-ray does. Yeah. You know, you can't just like take a snapshot picture of a scan like that. From what I'm told, that's why the whole thing you have to have a reader to read them. That's the problem.
And so, did the other guys of the medical staff did they convert afterwards? Like Andrew Taylor, did he end up converting or not?
I don't know, but I have no idea. I don't.
Okay, but they weren't like Christians.
I don't know anything about it. I don't know.
Yeah,
we didn't. I don't know if Andrew Taylor was a Christian before or after. I don't know. The one I know for sure that told me he was an atheist was Dr. Sure, because he said it, that he didn't believe in God. Yeah. And then he told the History Channel lady that he's now an agnostic. So as far as the rest of them, I mean, I haven't seen. The accident happened in 2006. I spent that year in the hospital, 07, and I haven't seen any of them or had any contact with any of them ever since, really.
And so, in your experience, how do skeptics react to your testimonies when you tell it to them? What's their reaction?
Well, it's interesting. When this first started, I've got boxes of when spending a year in the hospital, my medical records literally take up over a big box, great big box like binder and binder and binder, all the different reports, and from daily reports, nurse reports, all it takes up a big box. Somebody helped me go through one of the TV shows, went through, and they picked out like the highlights of all the stuff, because the way medical records are, it's not going to say, oh, this miracle happened. You've got to look at the befores, you got to look at the afters, and and see how it all fits together as a big piece of puzzle. It's not like the doctor isn't just going to write, especially here in the United States, especially if he's an atheist, he's not going to write a miracle happened. They're just going to document like the different measurements and stuff, and then you'd have to be able to look at it all, the information, interpret it, and realize something happened, right? So one of the TV shows at the beginning that I give him that whole big box to, went through and picked out a small binder of like maybe the most, 20, 30, 40, 50 pages that are most pertinent you have to use to compare to do it. And so they put this binder together, and I made a couple copies of it. And when people, like doctors or different people, had asked for the records, I used to send that out to them. And it's interesting. What I found was anybody that I sent that out to, they usually would never respond. And if they did respond back, because I want them to send it back to me. I always wanted it back. I'm going to send it to you, but send it back to me, because I don't want to have to keep making copies, So when I'd ask them to send it back and just see what the input was, usually it was quiet. Nobody ever said anything. But if I did talk to them, basically they would, by looking at this stuff, if it's somebody that's medical and they know how to read medical records and interpret medical records, based on that, they could say, yeah, a miracle happened. But it's interesting because the people that reached out and wanted to read it, this is my belief. They had already made up in their mind that there's no way it was impossible. So once they got the records, they looked at the records and like, yeah, the records are showing that it did, but you could falsify the records. So from my experience, when I share with real skeptics that this miracle has happened, most of them still don't believe it, even if I have medical documentation that they could look at if they're medical, because then they just discount and say, oh, then the medical records have been falsified or something like that. So it's what I think it is. It's what in the Bible, Jesus said this, because he raised people, 8 different people in the Bible from beginning down to raised from dead other than Jesus. Jesus is the 9th one. So if you read from all the way the Old Testament, New Testament, 8 different people raised from the dead. And in the New Testament, the people that raised from the dead, Jesus said about these people that didn't believe, he said, even if you see somebody raised from the dead with your own eyes, you still won't believe it. That's my story. And it confuses me, but that's truth. I could tell people that it happened. I could show them my scars. I could give doctors the records. But if they've already made up in their mind that miracles aren't real, even if you got the records, they don't believe the records. So actually I quit sending the records out. I couldn't even send it out because it didn't seem to make a difference to anybody that was even looking at them, because they've already made up their mind that miracles aren't real. So I think I think if somebody's a seeker, and if they're like questioning the truth, is this real? Is this not real? Maybe it's real, maybe it's not real. And they're like actually seeker. Those people will a lot of times believe because they're open-minded. But a true skeptic that's already made up in their mind that's not real, I think rarely do you ever change their mind after dealing with these people for 16 years. And I'm a skeptic and I get it. So I get that type of thinking. I understand that type of thinking because that's the way I'm wired. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah. I guess the records are good for honest skeptics, people honestly seeking for the truth.
Exactly.
So that's where they're very useful. And so it's good that you have them and that people can see them.
Yeah.
So it's thank you so much for sharing your testimony. And I think like this is one of the best arguments we have for God's existence and for the truth of Christianity, apart from the historical arguments, because in apologetics we focus on the historical reliability of the Gospels, the arguments for the resurrection, things like that. And it's good to have these different approaches that complement each other. Miracles on one side, like well-attested recent miracles, and the historical arguments that go pair to pair and that reinforce each other to make a good cumulative case for Christianity. And so your testimony is a great way to bolster the case for Christianity. So I'm really thankful that you came here to give this interview.
I think one other thought that really confirms Christianity is, people don't talk about this very often, but the fact that when somebody, depending on the person, becomes a Christian, how their lives can so dramatically change. And if God wasn't real, what would cause the dramatic change in a person's life if God wasn't real. You know, I think that's also a big proof.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
All right.
So thank you so much, Bruce, for coming here to speak about your testimony, and I hope
Absolutely.
this will speak to French people who have not heard this story yet. And yeah, thank you for your time, and I hope we can keep
Yeah,
contact.
you know, I just remembered one other thing. They used, so there was a large study done on the mortality rate of the number of arteries severed and who lived and who didn't. And it was done by University of Southern California, USC, big medical college here in the States. And so that was the case. That was the study that they used my case against us to compare my case against that study, the number of arteries severed and people died. And so that was the one that they made the comment that I'm the only person they could find in the world that's lived after having major arteries severed in 5 places. But I remember that the next one in line was actually from France, and it was somebody that had died and had 3 places major arteries are severed, and they were the number one. And what happened was, and that was all part of that University of Southern California study, somebody had a car accident right in front of the hospital in France, literally right outside the door of the hospital. They had 3 major arteries severed, and they were able to get the body from right outside the front of the hospital inside and get those 3 arteries, you know, sewn up or clamped off or whatever they did. And that person lived, and that was the person that had the most amount of arteries severed and lived known to man before mine. And that was 3 arteries completely severed, and that was right there, right in France, one time, and the person was right there. And so it all happened within minutes, the accident to the operation. And now to take just for the skeptic, from the point that the truck fell on me until they operated on me was over 2.5 hours, with 5 places, major arteries completely severed. And doctors say if you have 1 major artery severed, you bleed out in approximately 8 to 10 minutes. I had 5 places, and it was over 2.5 hours. So it was those angels holding it together that whole time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's amazing. That's really
Anyway,
amazing.
it is amazing. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for the opportunity, Matthew.
Yeah, you're welcome, and God bless you and your ministry, and I'll pray for you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Have a good day. Bye.